You're listening to episode 143 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Gary Gach speaks with us today about finding newness in the mix of contemporary Buddhist practices. With so many different ways of engaging with Buddhism in the West, it's hard to not only find what resonates most for us, but to even tell what's what. Is contemporary Western Buddhism a messy goulash, or a wonderfully colorful and tangy salad? Are we really doing Rinzai, or is this particular practice Soto Zen? And frankly, does it matter as the tradition evolves? We see practices under various names like mindfulness finding their way into our culture. We see children being taught to rest their mind on the breath in public classrooms, and their parents benefiting from it in the workplace. This ever-changing landscape provides a freshness to the practice that interests those who would otherwise not find it, but also opens up the doors to the social change that our traditional forms can help create. Gary Gach is an American author, translator, editor, teacher, and poet living on Russian Hill, San Francisco. His work has been translated into several languages and has appeared in several anthologies and numerous periodicals. He serves on the International Advisory Panel of the Buddhist Channel, a Malaysian Buddhist news website. A member of the Order of Interbeing, he teaches mindfulness in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh at the Church of the Fellowship of All Peoples. He currently hosts Haiku Corner for Tricycle, the Buddhist Review. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice evening in Missoula. And our guest today is Gary Gach. Gary, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Very glad to. And what I'd like to do before we go into various topics that we'd like to chat about with you is to have you tell us about your background.
I usually start when I'm 8 years old, chronologically as Gary Gach. When I was looking out the window when the class was coming back from lunch and was being given busy work to raise their left hand, raise their right hand, and I looked at the teacher eye to eye like, I ain't doing it, and I just looked out the window. And this was L.A., and it was a sunny day, and, you know, I had what I would later call a vision, because it all happened at once. But if I were to unpack it, I saw the workmen hammering. I heard the sound of the birds in the trees. I noticed that the blueprints that they were using, cut from trees, like the wood they were hammering, had a design. There seemed to be some kind of pattern to the interconnectedness of the work and the day and the sun and the wood and me in the room and them outside. And I was feeling just this kind of overwhelming sense of the interconnectedness of all things. But gosh, you know, when I tried telling people, I'm 8 years old, you know, is it God, or, you know, all that kind of stuff started getting in the way. And I realized, excuse me, I better keep this like a little piece of gold that I didn't want to mix with the rest of my coins. So you know how blue jeans have this little extra small pocket.
We always wonder
Anyway,
what that's for, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I just sort of tucked it away, and then 3 years later, I saw a paperback pocketbook, 35 cents, called The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. And, 35 cents, I saved up my pennies, bought it. And by around page 35, I was clearly home. This is the way I vibrate in relation to the universe if I had to choose, a path or a note or whatever. Um, and I noticed that there was really no reference to creator deity or origin of the universe, first cause, or anything. And on the other hand, it didn't exclude anything either. It was just, just this was my first exposure, and I felt perfectly at home, which I think, in a way, is both common and uncommon. It's common because I think, children, when we're children, our child mind is resonating with the universe in this wonderful sense. When I teach haiku to kids, I say, think back when you were just a few years ago, when you were always flashing and the universe was flashing at you and everything seemed vibrant, and they go, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. And I said, well, this is a way of continuing that as a responsible way, not childish, but child mind. So anyway, I think child mind, gets it. It gets what this is about. And I was exposed to it, I guess, at an early age, being in California, Pacific Rim, and it just sort of fit either my lifestyle or my genes. I don't know. So the next step was, how to put this into practice. Um, and there, I think, is where the first suffering began. This initial sense of disappointment, this initial sense that we all come to Buddhism at some point that we work on. We have some fuel there with our disappointment. So at that time, 50s, there were more Buddhas sitting behind glass cases meditating than there were living Buddhas on cushions to teach. And so it was also very interesting to see between then and now how in just this generation, if we can still use the word generation with the rapidity at which things accelerate, that uh, there's a very large availability of not only teachers, but practice groups, what we call Sangha, what we call community. The beloved community is what Dr. King called it. And to me, in my story, that's kind of where I'm, most excited these days. Um, that whatever you call your community, secular Buddhist, or don't even call it Buddhist, you call it mindfulness, or you call it, the path of the red Tara Dakini hummingbird. Whatever it is, this to me seems like, I don't know if it's, any way to put it, but to say that this is Sangha, that this energy of people coming to embrace their suffering and transform it, to transform others' suffering in this way that has been set out in a very clear, simple way. To me, this is like the Buddha. This is the living Buddha. And then, of course, between then and now, I tried this and I tried that, and I visited this group and I visited this. I sat with this teacher. Like Stephen. I'm sorry, I cut you off. I'll just finish the thought. Like Stephen Batchelor, he was a Tibetan, and he then he was Korean Buddhist, and now he's secular Buddhist. How we in the West have this great opportunity, which has up until now not really been present, although now it is present throughout the world thanks to globalization, to look at the various different manifestations that these teachings have taken in various cultures.
It's interesting you bring up this concept of sangha, of community, and it seems that we often find ourselves getting mired down by the technical definition of this including monastics or not, or this or that, and
Oh,
we see it as a way of putting up fences rather than being an inclusive part of society, of
sure,
each
sure,
other.
sure.
And
My sangha right now is whoever is I'm present with.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's such a more, uh, forgive use of the word, enlightened way of looking at the word because it
Well,
does
and then
open
when
it
we
up.
say enlightened, enlightened isn't really a concept or a thing. It's just a way of being from moment to moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So let's chat for a few minutes about some of the books that we wanted. We'll get to Complete Idiot's Guide to Understanding Buddhism, but before we go there, I want to talk to you about a book that came out prior to that. What book? Buddha Poems from Beat to Hip Hop.
Yeah.
And I want you to tell us about that. And in particular, I want to know, how did you get Peter Coyote to do your introduction?
Why did you wonder about that?
Odd curiosity on my part, that's all. Yeah.
Oh, I asked and he said yes. Um, 1990, I think. A George, a writer, I was to say Georgian, but then you think it was Soviet. A American writer from Georgia was writing these poems based on Rumi, and this became, for a decade, the most widely read poetry in America. A 13th century Sufi from Afghanistan who lived in Persia is being read by everybody. And I thought, this is great. I've been writing poetry since I was 11, mainly first haiku. And meanwhile, I've been seeing this influence of this path that I was on in poetry in so many different ways, in famous writers and not famous writers, on bulletin boards and Sangha newsletters. Um, and so I thought, wouldn't it be neat to, what if I could put them up on a big cork board and stand back and see what this looked like? And so I proposed this to the press that's part of my Sangha community of mindful living order of interbeing. The press is Parallax Press. And they said yes. And I had 5 years, it took 5 years. I could never do this with a New York publisher, I don't think. And it was wonderful. I learned so much doing it. And one of the things I was learning was that there really isn't a fence between one kind of Buddhism and another, especially when you're talking about poetry. It isn't whether it could be, there's a poem by Czesław Miłosz, and he's a Polish Catholic, and a Nobel winner. And I asked him if I could use it, and he said yes, and I published it. And then he was very proud to say at a readings after the book came out, the following is a poem that was accepted in a Buddhist anthology. And I cornered him later. I said, Czesław, what is it with that poem? And he said, well, that's a poem I wrote when I was corresponding with Thomas Merton, and we were talking about Tibetan Buddhism. And so it kind of confirmed for me that whether the influence is uh, direct or just in the air, these teachings have influenced so much of the 20th century that it was really a neat experience to see all the different ways. I could read you one, but that's okay.
No, go ahead. I'd like to hear
Well, I
it.
was just thinking, there's one that's not in the book that I've been really enamored of for some time. It's very short. It's like another shorty by this author, William Carlos Williams, who was a family doctor in Paterson, New Jersey. It's called Thursday, and this was written in 1921. I have had my dream, like others, and it has come to nothing, so that I remain now carelessly, with feet planted on the ground, and look up at the sky, feeling my clothes about me, the weight of my body in my shoes. Just hang on. The rim of my hat, air passing in and out at my nose, and decide to dream no more. 1921, he's writing mindfulness, he's writing the Fourth Noble Truth, and a friend of his had a son named Allen Ginsberg, who knew Williams and knew that poem and saw in it the possibility of Buddhism being available in America. And I'm like, wow, this is wonderful. Later he goes on to write the one that you see on everybody's bulletin board, which is So Much Depends. You know that one? So much depends on how does it go? So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. And it's that so much depends that opens up, everything as he then talks about this very specific kind of almost rural, detailed snapshot, 1923. So the anthology that I did wound up with 125 contributors, all shapes, sizes, colors, denominations, and it just really kind of helped solidify and vitalize, my vision of this as a living tradition, living path, with applications in art, daily life, work, all the various possibilities that are in front of us.
Yeah, the things that make up our human lives, and I think that's one reason we see it having resonance with people in 1920s America or today or really anywhere, is because this is about human experience and moment by moment experience. It doesn't require a particular ideological stance to breathe and be in the present moment.
And I really like how he talks about his hat brim. Sort of like, to me, that's like the ego.
So let's move on to the next book, which I imagine a number of the listeners to the podcast have read or certainly seen, is The Complete Idiot's Guide to Understanding Buddhism. What made you write that and put that together?
Well, I got to preface all this by, as we know, Buddhism is not in a book; it's practice. But the opportunity to perhaps present Buddhism to a larger audience than it had been receiving was just sort of happening around 2001 or two. Actually, it's like 1999. I finished What Book, and this is like, if that was kind of theory, a practice, because you could practice, we could read all the poems aloud. I wanted something that included, how do you tell people about the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and just all of Buddhism in a way, so that people in Tennessee or whatever might get it. And I was very enamored of the Dummies and Idiots Guide successes with bringing yoga and complex subjects like the internet, to Americans. They sort of like become the how-to books that I used to see in, pocket books in the 30s, like the Pocket Guide to Home Canning. And so it wouldn't be, and so I decided it wouldn't be it would just be kind of generic, because these books are kind of generic. It's a brand. You want, I just, Cliff Notes or something. And they also have a certain degree of humor without undercutting your points or deprecating anyone, which I like. I got to use pictures, which I like. I got to pick my pictures. And then the thing that really kind of sold me on my idea of doing this was that they're highly structured. To write one of these books, you kind of have to go through this drill about, well, if you write for us, here's the plan. You have to have so many parts, so many sections. Each section have to have so many subsections. You can't have an odd number of subsections. They have to be such a length, blah, 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 blah. And I realized, well, this is like early Buddhism, where you have lists and numbered lists, and, everything's very highly structured in order to convey this limitless experience. So It was sort of like pitching it for 2 years, hurry up and wait, and then, they wanted it yesterday. And the other reason, I guess, primarily, I did it was an opportunity to learn. Because I don't write to tell people what I know, what do I know, but to see what I think. And I learned a lot. For example, it was a lot harder than I thought to talk from a quote unquote neutral perspective. That is to say, I wasn't going to talk about my path or my tradition, but I talk about Theravada, Vipassana, insight meditation, Zen, Pure Land, Chinese, Japanese, traditional and contemporary, and Vajrayana, Tibetan. And it wasn't that easy. I found out, how many precepts are in one, and da-da-da-da. And so the net result was kind of that a lot of people have thanked me for this, and a few people I've learned actually don't like the book because it does that. It doesn't say, and in the end, this is the best.
This is one right. Yeah, this is the right
This
one.
is my, and well, sorry guys, I didn't name one. And the people who felt that one should have been named, you have that. Everyone thinks that theirs is the best because everybody thinks about themselves first. It's understandable. Why? Because it is. It was just sort of like it was in the right time in the right place, and I saw this ball coming at me, and I'm out in far out in the field, and I could catch it and run with it. They were just starting to do religion at the company, so it came in at the right time, and I'm just very honored that I was given this opportunity.
What were some of the things that you got out of the process itself? Were there some things that you said it helped you to learn things? What were some of the interesting things that you learned in doing the process of just writing the book and doing the research for it?
Well, in terms of the writing, it really reinforced for me, both as a writer and a human being, that these teachings are really very much to be tried out in one's own life. And so here I am writing about, I didn't know a lot about Tibetan Buddhism when I started, and I didn't know hardly much about Pure Land. And in order for me to write about it, the only authority that I could finally take when I wasn't sure or whatever was my own experience in confronting what I was writing and then stopping and seeing if it was true for me in this present moment while I was writing. The first time I quote a saying of the Buddha is the famous part from the talk when he was with the Kalama tribe. He was, saying, it's worth repeating, I think. If you hear something that's, sounds interesting or maybe true from on a podcast or in a book or, somebody on a stage or on TV or wearing a beautiful robe says it, don't go there. But just think about what that was. And if you try it out in your own life and you test it in your own lived world and it proves of use to you at that time, then by all means, take it up. And it's this see for yourself quality. It's not that if you don't do this, you'll be punished by a heavenly being. It's very much a very personal responsibility to make real for oneself that I found very deeply the case in writing about it. Then another thing was the fact that the way that all the different schools really, they're just like you're saying, there's these arbitrary fences at some places that some points in time that people put up called geographical boundaries. But I kind of like what Chade Mentang says. There's all these different yanas, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, but I like Hahayana.
Well, and the reference to the come and see it for yourself, as we find in the Kalama Sutta, and we keep admonishing people, don't take my word for it. Go and try this for yourself. See what your own experience is. I think Rahula said in what the Buddha taught that it's not it's ehipasiko, come and see, not come and believe.
Ehipasiko. And, you know, this is kind of universal in a way. It says in the Bible, "Oh, taste and see," in the Old Testament. You know, many traditions do say this, but I think it's of special relevance in Buddhism because we're talking about personal healing and transformation.
So let's move on to something we were chatting about before we started the interview. Is you do work with kids and on mindfulness and in poetry. Tell me more about what that motivation is, what you like about that, what's most fun about that for you.
Oh, well, um, you know, we may teach kids, but kids are really the ones teaching us when we do this. And there's so much, there's the future there. And I see so much potential. And also, I'm just so worried about not worried, but I see this incredible rise in teen suicide, the kind of world that they're inheriting that's so uncertain. Um, and that they're going to see a world, you know, that we won't see. So I kind of feel, um, and also there are different generations, so they put it together a different way, and it's really wonderful to see how uh, younger generations, new generations, are making through their own context of their times uh, new relevances for it. For example. I was talking with a person who grew up at the Tassajara Monastery, the Zen monastery, and they don't really call their parents were monks. They don't really call themselves Buddhists, but they say, "Yeah, heck, I believe in the middle way. You know, don't go to extremes." And that's profound. You know, I wasn't taught the middle way, you know, when I was growing up, and I think it's just so valuable. So, you know, what we try to teach children is what we try to teach them what life is, and they're teaching us what life is all about. I like teaching haiku because they're so close to it. You know, they get it, and they're very good at it, and it's very empowering for them to feel, oh, I can do this. Um, and now I'm not really the go-to person, but my community is that of Thich Nhat Hanh, Plum Village, all that, or Order of Interbeing, Community of Mindful Living, I don't know, whatever you call it. And this has become the number one item in our collective agenda. And I've been to some of the teachings with kids. Kind of, I'm allowed to sit on the side because it's very much for the kids. Um, and it's and this is we're not the only ones doing it. As your website shows, Goldie Hawn has got a mindfulness program. Um, and I think there's like four or five.
Mindful Schools is another one. Yeah, there are a bunch of groups who are doing it now, and I'm very encouraged to see that because I can only
Yeah,
imagine what it would have been like as a kid having the kinds of problems that many of us have. I'm raising both my hands on that. I'm in
yeah,
that bunch. And to have maybe had that kind of practice and someone to show me and those of us who had difficult childhoods ways to better deal with things would have been so helpful to us.
yeah. And I think too, I had to credit Daniel Goleman bringing these teachings to the West in a name that's very acceptable called emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Just as John Kabat-Zinn, picked up on mindfulness as a good, name. And now he's also calling it social intelligence because the way of bringing into these, almost denatured Buddhist teachings of mindfulness and emotional intelligence, but to include compassion. The social intelligence, meaning that I don't have or put another way, I have a multi-skull brain. That right now you and I are configuring a world that neither of us could alone. Um, and that's how we learned. That's how we evolved as a species.
And how wonderful is that?
I think there's these very interesting places. The other interesting place right now, I think, that I'm looking at is, we've had mindfulness in the sense of health, the sense of wellness as well as fitness. That and not only should I have a fit body, but no, I should kind of learn about my mind. And that's taking hold. There's mindfulness for kids. And another aspect that I find interesting is just is kind of growing in a nascent stage is Buddhism, or mindfulness, if you will, at the workplace.
Yeah, yeah.
Because after all, I'm living in America. Other people may be living in less capitalist societies. It's still capitalism here, at least. And, that's where the pedal meets the metal. And I, as a writer, most of my life, I've had about 100 odd jobs in different offices. And it's very often the question people ask about, well, Buddhism, how do I deal with this guy at work?
Yeah.
This is the number one question. So this thing that we were saying earlier about, if only we learned this as kids, still, if we learn it as kids, how are we going to apply it at work with other people maybe who don't get it and are maybe walking around like a tin god or making life unpleasant for other people and, for themselves. And have you heard of Search Inside Yourself? It's the new program that the name is cute because it comes from Google. Search Inside Yourself. They tried for 2 years when they've had a raft of some of the finest teachers in America come into the campus of Google and teach, and then decide, kind of like, how can we craft, just like there's this mindfulness-based stress reduction program, a program for the workplace. And they're calling it Search Inside Yourself. And starting, we're here in September, so in October, they'll start bringing it to the public. And that I think will be very interesting to see.
Yeah, at our workplace, we've also had that. They had some folks do MBSR training, and also in another aspect of my own company's work, they're big on culture training. And part of that, having gone to a couple-day session on that, and they didn't even call it this, but it was a guided meditation. And it was so transparently to someone with a couple of decades of this of understanding what exactly this was and what exactly they were doing and how terrific it was to see this in a context that could apply to everyone there, regardless of what their particular religious beliefs may be. That this practice was still finding its way into a very pragmatic and necessary place.
Yep.
One of the challenges that I have with it, though, is I'm a little challenged by the idea that we're going to teach people to deal with more stress rather than finding ways of reducing the stress itself.
Yeah. I think that, like with psychology and Buddhism, often there's this mistaken, I don't know, the idea that we'll find a better self waiting in the wings, when the real teachings of the Buddha is there's no self. And so and so that kind of, to me, is part of the, Marcel Marceau, when he's doing the mime about seeing what the limits are in a glass cage, he pushes his hands up, he can't go any further. It's kind of to see how far we can go with what I call denaturing the teachings from their context, pulling it up out of the soil, and some of the soil will stick to the roots, but we're transplanting it and seeing, where it may fall short, and it becomes, say, medication instead of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you actually are facilitating, I think might be a word for it, a discussion on the Patheos blogs on the future of Buddhism. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, for a little while, I was, odd jobs. I was editing the Buddhist section for a new interfaith site. The title is a mashup, as we say, between Path and Theos. Patheos, patheos.com. And, BeliefNet has kind of, its star has risen as high as it can, and they want to make it be another they think there's room, and I think there is, for another online site for a discussion, keeping up resources, learning about what's going on in our traditions and in others. And one summer, they across the board had everybody um, sort of host at a town hall forum about a topic, and they picked the future of Judaism, the future of paganism, the future of uh, Mormonism, and so forth. And so, I mean, a lot of the projects I do seem to be done in no time. It's like, how much can you do uh, with least time is often a great way to work. And so I was able to pull together, I don't know, about 24 uh, articles by people in about 2 weeks, and it's up. I think I have a link to it from my website. And, the future of Buddhism, of course, is the present moment. And yet, it's very interesting to watch, if you're a gardener, this tending seeds or transplanting or, how causes and conditions are determining how some things are going to take and some things aren't. And how, in a lot of ways, it's still wide open. It's going to take decades before anyone has any idea what in the West these teachings really might be. And not to say that right now they aren't fine, but it's still in this wonderfully evolutionary kind of stage, which it may always be, but right, it seems to be at this place of um,
Punctuated equilibrium.
distributed equilibrium.
Yep.
Yeah. Metabolism is sort of homeostasis is not stasis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. And we talk about the evolution of these traditions, and not just Buddhism, but other religious traditions are also going through this as they encounter a different environment. There are different selective pressures on it with how people carry ideas forward. And so they're all going through some changes, and it's not disparaging traditions, and that's something I keep repeating to people, is that secular Buddhism isn't about the traditional forms being bad. It's not that at all. Many of us come from those backgrounds. We have great admiration and respect for them. We're looking for a practice that is more in keeping with our cultural context.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. That's going to take a while because our culture itself is changing rapidly.
I resonate very, very strongly with this, um, with your work of bringing the teachings in a very pragmatic way to people, where the empirical results are independent of any things that have been carried over from other traditions, superstitions.
Yeah, yeah.
On the other hand, some things we call superstitions, if you jump into them, you find out that uh, they work too. I'll go to Chinatown and I'll go to the oldest Buddhist temple in America, and they hand me a little booklet so I can read the sutras that they're reading. I know it's the Heart Sutra, but I don't know it in Chinese. We chant it. At the end, I know we're chanting to Amida Buddha, which is to say we're chanting our own enlightened mind to ourselves or to itself, and we do that 108 times. It's chanting with our ears. It's just another form of mindfulness.
Right.
We're done. We make an organic lunch in the temple's kitchen. We all enjoy it, and everybody goes out into the afternoon. To me, it's interesting to conceive that this is a tradition that's been going on for about 120 years, and it's just part of their daily life so much that I don't know if I would call it a religion. And I don't know if any of these people really would, I haven't asked them, think that Amida Buddha has arms to hold us or eyes to see us, but that they get that this is about our mind.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it's just, it's an amazing time that way.
It is, and we're really made up of our stories, and those stories can inspire us. They can help us with our practice. They don't have to be literally true. They may or may not. It doesn't really matter as much as what are we getting out of what we're doing moment by moment. How do we take it, even if we know that it's Brer Rabbit saying, "Don't throw me into the briar patch." We can still learn from that. We don't mean that a rabbit speaks for real and did this trick, but we can still
Uh,
learn from these things.
yeah, well, I mean, so much of this has to do, I think, in terms of practice, with things that just go beyond words. Like, for example, if you look in terms of the frames of the four establishments of mindfulness, which are body, feelings, mental formations, and objects of the mind, each of these is embedded in itself so that we're looking at our body with our body.
Right, right.
And in doing that, we look at our mind because our body is an object of mind. And our feelings come up as feelings. And so they're interconnected, and it's something that you just have to experience intuitively. The word at some point the words fall away. And sacred story is it's one of the human traditions if we recognize it as such. I'm going to tell you something because it's not an image, but here's an image of so that you can get an introduction to it. It's like skillful means, and once you get it, let go of the image and enjoy where it took you.
Yeah. I can describe chocolate. I can show you a picture of chocolate, but really, at some point, have a piece of chocolate. So, Gary, let's talk for a minute about your background. Your root teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, teaches Zen and Theravada, and of course that's
Yeah.
I'm familiar with Zen and Theravada practices, and that's opening some doors in the realm of interfaith understanding. As we're talking a little bit about here, tell us a little bit about your own thoughts on that kind of progress and what you're seeing just in the development of your time doing this practice. What kinds of interfaith changes are you seeing happening more recently?
You mean intra-faith?
Inter and intra, both actually.
Yeah, yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh was a student of comparative religion, as they called it then, at Columbia University. And as a Jew, I am a Jewish Buddhist. Um, I came to understand Jesus through reading a book by my Buddhist teacher, Living Buddha, Living Christ. So I'm, very grateful that I have a teacher that both teaches interfaith and has come from a place on the planet, Vietnam, that's, if you look on a map, is just in between India and China. So they got from the Silk Route and the Spice Route both the teachings of Vipassana from India and Sri Lanka and the East Asian traditions of Zen. He also teaches Pure Land in his way, in a Zen way. And the Lotus Sutra a little too, because back basically in the East, except for maybe when Japan, everybody had to register, and then that was kind of broken up. There's more of like when you go to a Chinese restaurant, you have this lazy Susan table, and you take some of this and you take some of that, and everybody enjoys from this big round feast. And that's what I feel like, that we have all these. Some people, like I've been on retreat, and there was a Soto Japanese guy, and he and I were talking about something that was said in the Dharma talk that sounded so Soto Zen. And he said, yeah, this was like Soto Zen. Our tradition is Rinzai Zen. And, nobody hardly makes any distinction in the West about the difference between Soto and Rinzai Zen is Zen. But Thich Nhat Hanh does really fall down on the Rinzai more than the Soto. It's just wonderful to be able to learn of each and have them all have their unique characteristics, like at a salad bar, rather than this notion of, say, a melting pot where it's like one big schmear, like everything's all like a goulash. It's just very refreshing. It always keeps the practice new, too. And you can find, um, the points before the fences got put up, where in Zen, there is a koan in the Book of Equanimity where they say, yeah, Theravada is part of the practice of Zen. And there are places in Theravada that are pure Zen themselves. It's since I kind of have a sense of what each of these are from a scholastic sense, it's really terrific to be able to practice, a little of this, little of that, whatever's, right for you. And we're all practicing this together. And, not everybody's, we're all going as a river, but some people may be more in terms of Pure Land and others in terms of Zen and others in terms of Theravada. And the net this is why I say Sangha is so exciting, because you can see that underneath the waves, the ocean is just pure, calm, limitless wateriness. Wave, 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 down below, no come, no go.
And that's what I find of value to what some people have as an aversion to what they call cafeteria Buddhism, where you pick out. But really, you can also view this and take this as a sharing and learning and mutual support of the strengths of what these different ways of engaging with it can bring to the table.
Exactly, and I think you're exactly right in the way that you're doing it too. That is, if you, I think one of the criticisms is that people go off and they do this alone.
Yeah,
and they'll go to they're like a bee, and they'll go to this flower and that flower, and then they never land anywhere. But if you're have a practice group where with other people and perhaps a teacher or somebody's nominally facilitating, then it's terrific.
Well, our guest today has been Gary Gach, and you can find more about what Gary is doing on his website, which is at word.to. That's WORD.TO. Gary, thank you very much for being here.
Ted, thank you for the interview, and thank you for your life.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.